never his mind on where he was, what he was doing. Greetings and welcome back to another fun and exciting episode of the Vodkast Does Dungeons & Dragons. I'm your host as always, DMJ. Today I want to talk about the dangers, not so much the dangers, but the risks involved of advancing a party too quickly. The early levels, I believe, are just as important as those later levels. So let's first take a look at why our characters like to level up for a moment. Obviously, if you're starting a new campaign and you're starting out at level 1, you don't have a lot to work with. You don't have a lot of hit points. Your armor class probably sucks. You don't have a lot of spells. But that's where the character is truly born. And I think that's where role-playing really comes into play. You don't have to worry so much about all those other statistics right off the bat. It's developing your character and creating a character that's interesting and fun to play for the next 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 20 levels of this character's life. But as far as combat goes at those low levels, all the misses that you have on your targets and all the hits that you're taking because of a low AC really are helping to develop that character to be a stronger character. If they're not meant to live, then they're probably going to die. However, it's really fun at those early levels to look forward to the future. And I know how it feels when you're finally able to cast, let's say, Lightning Bolt or Fireball. It's really exciting to get to that point. But as a DM, I think it's just as important starting out at level 1 to make the game just as interesting at level 20 as it is right at the beginning. And the whole time, it's up to you to fulfill whatever this character's desire is and whatever the player's desire is to have fun at the table playing Dungeons & Dragons. As a dungeon master who runs his own world, I can understand the desire to push that party forward faster and faster, give them better magical items, get them the spells they need, get them better armor. However, it is my world, and the problem with that being is that usually when I write a campaign for characters that are starting out at level 1, I'm looking into the future. I'm not looking at game 1. Sure, I'm looking at how they're going to start out, how they're going to meet each other, where they're going to meet each other. That's all very important too. But I'm also looking towards the future. I want the party to know that I've got a plan for them. I want them to know that in my mind, I have a story that I think they're going to love. And I want to get to the points in the story just as much as they want to level up as characters. But what if I told you none of that mattered? What if stats, what if items, what if levels doesn't really matter? What if Dungeons & Dragons at its heart, for me at least, is the characters and the role-playing aspect of it? I think it's really important to take those early levels all the way up to like level 7 or 8 or so and really develop those characters. Take your time. Don't rush through it, because the further you get, the faster you get further along, it's going to be harder and harder. And now recently I faced a game where my party that I'm running right now is level 9. They found themselves in a barbarian arena, the Ice Shard Barbarian Arena, and they're going to have to fight a bunch of things to be able to either appease the barbarians or find a way to escape in the meantime. And I threw at them, the first thing I threw at them was a frost giant, and I thought this frost giant was going to tear them apart and leave them really soft for the next round, which happened to be frost salamanders. But for whatever reason, I rolled terrible on the frost giant, and they rolled incredible the whole fight and nearly destroyed it in about 3 or 4 rounds. It was really impressive how well they worked together to accomplish that. And they could have done that probably a level earlier, I would have thought, because when they tore through it, I was left with this moment of like, geez, is something wrong here? Am I the one that's the problem here? Have I advanced them too fast? And I don't think that is the issue, because as a DM, I think you should be able to step up and on the fly change some of those stats of the monsters so that it makes it more of a challenging combat. Now, with that being said, there are future encounters that I have planned for them, and what I've done to counteract that without spoiling too much for them if they're watching is really planned out a series of events that are going to happen where it's not just going to be one creature on 5. It's going to be multiples. Now, this seems obvious to a lot of DMs, but when I think of like epic moments in battle, it's usually, you know, the dragon that you're facing, the giant that you're facing. It's usually not a horde of goblins, because that's boring. However, that's a great way to spice up combat, because if they're busy trying to get through all the goblins, that big meanie is definitely doing a number on them. Or vice versa. If they're focusing on the big meanie and not focusing on the wolves that are coming out of the woods at them and tearing them apart little bits by piece, then it makes for a much more interesting combat. If they're focused on 2 different enemies at the same time, it definitely splits up what they have to do as a party. Now, this is just a simple solution, but this can start at the early levels too. Obviously, at early levels, like I stated earlier, you have a very low AC, you have low hit points, but it doesn't mean that you can't adjust the hit points, armor class, or whatever it is of the creature that they're fighting. Normally at these lower levels, you're throwing skeletons and cobbles and goblins and little things like that. Maybe occasionally you'll throw a hobgoblin or a bugbear at them. But at those early levels, they have to work together to really defeat the one enemy. But as they progress and get stronger, it takes a lot less to bring the enemy down. And that's what I want to really focus on today. Advancing a party too quickly doesn't give you the opportunity at those early levels to really dig into the character, not just, like I said, in the role-playing aspect, but techniques too and tactics. How do they go about combat? This is a great time to learn your characters in the game. Don't rush it. Take your time at level 1, 2, 3, 4. I think those first 4 levels are just as important as any other level in the game. And spending time with those levels gets you to A, know the characters a little bit better, B, the characters get to know each other a little bit better, and C, you get to see the flavor of the game. You see if they're enjoying it. You get to see if this is definitely a storyline that you want to take them down, or if it's something you want to change on the fly. But if you've already leveled them up to 10, 12, 13, 14 because you're excited as a DM to get to those points in the story or module, whatever you're running, then I think you're ruining it for the player. I, as a player, come to the table to role play and spend time with my friends, and that's the most important aspect of the game to me. However, not every player is the same. You are going to run into players that are very power hungry, and all they care about is stepping on that ant to get the next amount of XP so they can go up a level, so they can get the spell they've been waiting for, so they can do this, that, and the other. Also, not just leveling up, but giving your characters or your party too powerful of equipment or too much gold at the beginning, that can also ruin a party too, because then they're living on easy street. They don't have to worry about the little things on the road. You don't even have to take those moments anymore to role play a situation where they might have to barter for a cheaper item that they're going to need for this location they're going to. For example, Shamar, which is a frozen wasteland in my world, is where the party finds themselves now. They actually shook hands with the devil and made a deal with them, all except for one, the paladin, Wolf, who would allow them to survive in Arctic temperatures. It would never again in their lives would they have to worry about being cold. So they took that deal. But that's a great element too. Besides the point that I'm trying to make today is setting up bigger enemies earlier on in the game. Or earlier friends early on in the game as well. Establishing communication between players and non-player characters in the game is super important in those early levels too, because they're learning the people they can go back to if they need to get a mission, learning that the librarian might have a little bit more information than he's willing to let on. All these characters that they meet at the early levels are super important to the future of your game as far as I'm concerned. And if you rush by those towns or you give them too much money, they just go in, buy what they want, they never have that interaction with the shop teller. Maybe that time he had a little bit of information. Perhaps he was being held up and there was a goblin with a dagger to his wife's neck just behind the curtain or something like that. There's so many things you can do at those early levels to establish the characters, the storyline, their friends, their enemies, that rushing it through, giving them too much money and giving them too much power all at once kind of defeats the purpose of D&D in my point. It's the effort as a group to move forward as a party, whatever the storyline may be, whatever their goals may be as characters. It's your duty, I think, to pace it correctly. Now, I'm not saying you should never rush a game. Perhaps there's a situation where your game requires it, or the game might turn out to be better if you start them out at a higher level. I mean, we've all, or for the most of us have played D&D for a very long time. I've been playing for about 30 years myself, and I've experienced all kinds of dungeon masters and all kinds of games. But the games that meant the most to me are the ones that took their time, the ones that had the lore, the one that had, the DM knew their world really well, the one where the story was rich, the characters that you met were rich, and the enemies weren't just surface level. There was something deeper to them. Being a bad guy in a game is great. It's great to finally get to that bad guy and fight them. But what makes them a bad guy too? That's a really important thing, I think, at the early levels too. Establish your enemies or your villains to be something more than just the bad guy. Give them other characteristics that allow them to be more human, or elf or dwarf or whatever they might be. Because I think making their enemies and their villains richer, it makes it that much sweeter later on when they've put in all the efforts from level 1 all up to like 17 or whatever you've decided to have them fight this big bad guy or encounter them. Perhaps it doesn't end as a fight. But the fact of the matter is every step along the way is really important. And if you start handing out bags of holding at level 3, You know, what's the point in encumbrance? Now, I don't normally deal with encumbrance a lot in my game. However, it is a stat that as a DM, I do kind of pay attention to. I don't mind if a character goes over a little bit. But if you've got a little character like a Jerobean rather, and their strength is a 10, and they're only allowed to carry 80 pounds, which I don't even understand that, because a Jerobean is, you know, might weigh like 20, 30, 40 pounds at the most. So I've never quite understood that, but it's fantasy, and I accept those things in the game. I don't go out of my way to make them any, I don't make them any more difficult than they were already put in place in the game. So I don't want to go out of my way to be like, listen, you're 20 pounds. You're not going to carry 80 pounds. There's just no way it's going to happen. Today's episode was supposed to be me and two of my Dungeon Master friends sitting down and talking about things, but unfortunately, due to the tropical storm Debbie, we were unable to film last night, or several nights ago, whenever this is being released at this point. That is a future episode of the Vodkast and Friends Do Dungeons and Dragons that hopefully will be out next week, possibly 2 weeks from now. But I really, really hope you're enjoying this content that I'm creating. I'm just trying to share information that has helped me as a DM through the years, and I hope that it can help you to just take a moment to step back, look at some of the ideas I have. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't agree with me. That's perfectly okay either way, but I think it's worth listening to. I would think it's worth listening to any Dungeon Master who has advice. Whether you use that advice or not, what the hell? It's not that important. But the most important thing is learning, growing, and making sure that your players and characters have fun in the game. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I've really loved making it. If you guys are loving the content I'm creating as much as I love creating the content that you guys are watching, would you please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, and hitting that little bell icon, because it'll let you know every time I put out a new video. Don't forget to make somebody smile today and make yourself a better person tomorrow than you were today. Tomorrow, let's make the world spin a little bit happier and a little bit geekier. Together as one, in the sun and the rain, dancing together, my brothers and sisters. Live life to the fullest and love every moment of it, because you just never know when that last moment's going to come for you. However, never live in fear of that moment. Always live in love, but never let your inner child die. Ooh. Take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and take care of those around you who cannot take care of themselves, for they are the ones that need it the most. And if no one has told you today that they love you, the Vodcast loves you very much, just the way you are. All right, guys, do no harm. I'm Geycen Oliveira. This is the Vodcast, does Dungeons and Dragons, and I'll catch you guys a little bit further on down the road to 50. Take care, my friends, and happy adventuring.
Don't go to sleep with a catch it in your pocket.